The moment Rowan looked up from his breakfast, he noticed something no one else in the crowded diner seemed to see. A little girl, no older than 5, stood near the entrance with oversized sleeves covering her tiny hands. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She wasn't making a sound. She simply stared at the warm pancakes on his plate with the kind of quiet longing no child should ever have to carry. Behind her stood a young woman gripping the handle of an old suitcase, trying to gently pull the little girl toward the door before anyone noticed. She wanted to disappear unnoticed, carrying her pride and heartbreak with her. But destiny had other plans that morning, and one simple glance would change 3 lives forever. Before this unforgettable story continues, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, share it with someone who still believes kindness can change lives, and subscribe to Journey of Kindness if you believe in second chances and the power of compassion. Your support helps us continue bringing real, emotional stories that remind the world hope still exists. The morning sun poured through the diner's wide windows, painting golden streaks across the polished tables. The restaurant buzzed with ordinary life. Waitresses hurried between booths, coffee steamed from white mugs, families laughed over breakfast, and businessmen checked their phones between bites. Everything felt wonderfully normal. Yet hidden inside that ordinary morning was a story of silent desperation. The young woman was named Marin. Only 26 years old, life had already carved exhaustion into her gentle face. Her brown coat had once been elegant but now showed years of wear. The small suitcase beside her held everything she owned after months of sleeping in shelters, cheap motels, and sometimes even inside bus stations. Every dollar she earned from temporary cleaning jobs disappeared into food, transportation, or another place to sleep for one more night. Beside her stood little Ivy. Her curly hair framed a pale face that still held the innocence every child deserves. She had learned something no child should ever need to learn. She had learned not to ask for things her mother could not give. Instead of saying she was hungry, she simply looked. Instead of crying, she stayed quiet. She believed that being brave somehow made life easier for her mother. That morning they had walked nearly 3 miles after leaving the women's shelter before sunrise. The shelter only allowed guests to stay for a limited number of nights, and their time had run out. Marin had spent her final coins buying a bus ticket to another town where she hoped a factory might still be hiring. But the bus would not leave until afternoon, leaving them with nothing except several empty hours and empty stomachs. The diner had never been part of the plan. They had only stepped inside because Ivy needed to warm her frozen hands for a few minutes. Marin promised herself they would leave before anyone thought they wanted charity. Then Ivy saw the pancakes. They were stacked high with melting butter and dripping maple syrup. The smell filled the room. For just 1 second, she forgot to hide her hunger. That was the second Rowan noticed her. Rowan had spent most of his life believing success solved everything. At 38, he owned several construction companies and rarely had time for anything beyond meetings and deadlines. His expensive watch, tailored jacket, and luxury truck outside suggested a man who had everything under control. But appearances often hide painful truths. 2 years earlier, Rowan had buried his wife after a sudden illness. They had dreamed of having children someday, but that dream disappeared long before she did. Since her passing, work became his refuge. He built buildings because he no longer knew how to rebuild himself. Every Saturday morning he visited this diner because it reminded him of happier days. He always ordered the same breakfast. He always sat in the same booth. Until this Saturday. Watching Ivy's eyes fixed on his plate awakened something inside him that had been asleep for years. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. He remembered watching his own mother quietly skip meals when money became tight after his father's accident decades earlier. She had always insisted she wasn't hungry, even when her stomach growled loud enough for him to hear. Without hesitation, Rowan stood. Marin immediately lowered her head. She assumed they would be asked to leave. Instead, Rowan smiled with a kindness so genuine it almost startled her. Within minutes, fresh pancakes, scrambled eggs, fruit, warm toast, and hot chocolate appeared at a nearby table. Marin's eyes instantly filled with tears. Pride urged her to refuse. Hunger begged her to accept. She looked down at Ivy. The little girl's hopeful smile answered the question her heart could not. As Ivy took her first careful bite, joy returned to her face. It wasn't excitement or greed. It was simple relief. The kind only someone who has known hunger truly understands. Around the diner, several customers quietly watched. Some smiled. Others pretended not to notice while secretly wiping tears from their own eyes. Rowan returned to his booth without expecting gratitude. But something inside him refused to stop there. While Marin and Ivy ate, he noticed the worn suitcase, the patched shoes, and the careful way Marin folded every napkin before placing it beside the plate as if trying to repay the kindness somehow. Those tiny details spoke louder than words ever could. After breakfast, Rowan gently introduced himself. Marin hesitated before explaining pieces of her story. She had escaped an abusive relationship almost a year earlier with nothing except her daughter and a backpack. Every attempt to rebuild their life seemed to collapse. Employers wanted permanent addresses. Landlords wanted steady jobs. Jobs required transportation. Transportation required money. Every solution demanded something she no longer possessed. It was a circle impossible to escape alone. Rowan listened without interruption. For the first time in months, Marin spoke to someone who wasn't judging her or rushing her story. When she finished, silence filled the booth. Then Rowan made a decision that surprised even himself. One of his construction offices desperately needed someone to manage paperwork, organize files, and answer phones. The position wasn't glamorous, but it offered steady income, benefits, and dignity. He asked only one question. Was she willing to work hard? Marin answered before he even finished asking. By Monday morning she arrived wearing the only clean blouse she owned. The office staff welcomed her cautiously at first. Some questioned Rowan's decision privately. Others assumed she wouldn't last. Weeks passed. Then months. Marin arrived before everyone else and often stayed after closing. She learned quickly, treated every customer with respect, and never complained. Slowly, skepticism turned into admiration. Meanwhile Ivy began attending the daycare next door. For the first time in nearly a year, she made friends. She laughed without worrying where they would sleep that night. She drew pictures filled with sunshine instead of rain. One afternoon Rowan found a small drawing resting on his desk. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands beneath a bright yellow sun. Written in uneven letters were the words, "Thank you for seeing us." Rowan couldn't remember the last time tears had reached his eyes. Months became a year. Marin saved every extra dollar. She rented a small apartment with blue curtains Ivy proudly picked herself. They bought second-hand furniture that somehow made the empty rooms feel like home. Ivy received her first bookshelf, her first bicycle, and her first birthday party surrounded by classmates who genuinely cared about her. Life wasn't perfect. Bills still arrived. Work remained difficult. Some nights exhaustion returned. But hope had finally become stronger than fear. Rowan changed too. He stopped hiding inside endless work. He started mentoring struggling employees, supporting local shelters, and creating apprenticeship programs for single parents seeking stable careers. He realized generosity was never about changing the whole world overnight. Sometimes it began with simply noticing the person everyone else overlooked. Years later, the diner celebrated its 50th anniversary. The owner invited longtime customers back for a community breakfast. Rowan accepted. So did Marin. So did 12-year-old Ivy. As they entered together, memories flooded every corner of the restaurant. The same windows. The same booths. Even the same smell of pancakes drifting through the air. Only this time everything was different. Ivy no longer stared with hungry eyes. She carried a tray filled with breakfasts she was helping serve as a volunteer during the fundraiser for homeless families. An elderly woman sitting alone smiled warmly at Ivy. The girl quietly noticed the woman's trembling hands and carefully cut her pancakes before placing the plate in front of her. Nobody asked her to. She simply remembered what kindness looked like. Rowan watched silently from across the room. In that single moment he understood something profound. The breakfast he bought years earlier had never truly been about food. It had been about restoring someone's belief that they still mattered. Kindness, when offered sincerely, doesn't end with the person who receives it. It continues traveling through countless lives, often in ways we'll never witness. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a heartfelt comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to Journey of Kindness. Every interaction helps these meaningful stories reach more people who may be waiting for a reminder that compassion still exists. Special request. Before this story ends, please comment with the words, "Kindness changes lives." We'd love to see how many people still believe one small act of compassion can transform someone's future. As the morning sunlight filled the diner once again, Rowan looked at the little girl who had once silently stared at his breakfast. She was taller now, happier, and filled with dreams instead of fear. Marin smiled with quiet gratitude, knowing that one stranger's willingness to truly see them had rewritten the ending of their story. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with flashing lights or extraordinary events. Sometimes they begin with a warm meal, an open heart, and one person choosing not to look away. And in a world that often moves too fast to notice quiet suffering, perhaps the greatest act of all is simply seeing someone who feels invisible, and reminding them that they are worthy of hope, dignity, and a brand new beginning.